The rain outside falls in a steady rhythm, each drop against the window a reminder that the world is still turning somewhere beyond the dark. The air is cool, and the silence between the rain feels alive, as if it's waiting for something. You can close your eyes if you want. You don't need to look. The night sees you anyway. There's a comfort in nights like this, in knowing you're alone but not lonely. Still, every quiet moment carries a story. Every sound has a beginning, and every silence has an ending. Some stories are remembered because they were written down. Others because they refuse to be forgotten. Tonight, I'll tell you the kind that cling to the edges of truth, stories whispered from the corners of the real world. You don't have to believe them. Belief changes nothing. What happened, happened. These are the voices that once spoke in rooms like yours, beneath roofs like this one, while rain fell the same way it does now. So just listen. Let the rain settle your breathing. Let your heartbeat slow. You're not in danger here. You're only listening. But as you listen, know this, the things I'll tell you were once told by someone else, someone who also thought the night was harmless. Tonight's first story begins in a small motel along an empty road in Arizona. A woman, traveling alone, stopped to rest there one summer night. She had been driving for hours through a storm, and the wipers had barely kept the glass clear. When she finally saw the flickering sign, vacancy, she pulled in, grateful just to be out of the rain. The man at the front desk was quiet, polite. He handed her a key without a word about the storm or the hour. The room smelled faintly of bleach and dust. She dropped her bag, turned on the heater, and sat for a moment listening to the rain against the window. It felt peaceful. Safe. But then she heard it. A dull, steady tapping from the wall behind her bed. 3 soft knocks. She thought maybe the pipes were settling, or that someone next door was restless. She turned on the TV, hoping the noise would fade beneath the hum. It didn't. The tapping came again, this time slower, heavier. She tried to ignore it, but eventually, curiosity won. She called the front desk, asked if someone was staying in the room beside hers. The man paused before answering. Then he said, quietly, "That room's been empty all week." She hung up without speaking, but the sound didn't stop. It came again, softer now, like fingertips brushing against the wall instead of knocking. She didn't sleep much that night. In the morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, and the rain had stopped. She packed quickly, left the key at the desk, and drove away without looking back. Later that day, police cars filled the motel parking lot. A body had been found in the room beside hers. The coroner said the man had been dead for days before she ever arrived. She never went back. But sometimes, on nights when the rain falls hard and the house is quiet, she swears she can still hear that faint tapping, soft, patient, coming from the wall behind her bed. It was the summer of 1986 when a traveling nurse named Evelyn drove through the Arizona desert under a curtain of rain. She had been on the road for 12 hours, her headlights cutting through sheets of water that turned the highway into a silver blur. The storm followed her, steady and endless, and when the small neon sign appeared through the downpour, Desert Palm Motel, she took it as a blessing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. The man behind the counter barely looked up as she checked in. His face was pale under the yellow light, his eyes heavy with the kind of weariness that comes from too many nights alone. He slid the key across the counter, said her room was at the far end. She thanked him and stepped back into the rain. Her room was small, dim, and clean enough to be forgettable. She placed her bag on the chair, hung her wet coat, and listened to the steady rhythm of rain against the glass. The silence that followed felt thick, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Evelyn sat on the bed and closed her eyes, ready to drift into the kind of sleep that follows exhaustion. That was when she heard it, 3 slow knocks from the wall behind her headboard. She opened her eyes, heart thudding once, then falling still. Another knock came, same rhythm, same distance. She tried to laugh it off. Motels were full of noises, pipes, vents, the shuffle of another guest. She turned on the small television, let the static fill the space, and tried again to rest. But the sound came back, softer this time, like someone pressing their palm against the wall. She called the front desk, her voice low. The man on the other end paused for a long moment before saying, "That room's empty, ma'am. Has been for a few days." Evelyn didn't reply. She hung up, turned the volume of the TV higher, and pulled the blanket to her chest. Every few minutes, there it was again, the faint, irregular knocking. Once, she thought she heard a whisper under it, too soft to make out, too clear to dismiss. She sat there in the dark, staring at the wall, listening until the sound faded with the storm. Morning came bright and colorless. The rain had stopped, and the desert was already warming under the sun. Evelyn dressed quickly and left the key on the counter. The man at the desk didn't look up this time either. She got in her car and drove away, not looking at the building in the mirror. By noon, police cars crowded the motel parking lot. Yellow tape fluttered in the dry wind. A guest who checked in after her had complained of a terrible smell coming from the next room. Inside, they found a man lying on the bed, still and pale. The coroner said he'd been dead for at least 3 days before the storm. No one could explain why the night clerk hadn't noticed, or why Evelyn had heard sounds from that room. She never told anyone about the knocks, about how they had seemed to follow her breathing, how the wall had seemed alive. Years later, when storms came through her town, she still caught herself pausing at the sound of the wind against her window, soft, deliberate, and distant. She would close her eyes and remember the thin walls of that motel, the empty room, and the quiet truth that stayed with her ever since. Sometimes, the walls remember what we can't bear to hear. In the spring of 2003, 4 friends set out on a hiking trip through the thick forests of the Pacific Northwest. They were young, restless, and chasing a kind of freedom that only the wilderness could offer. Their plan was simple: 2 days into the mountains, 1 day back. The trail they chose was called Ridgeway Pass, a winding path that cut through miles of moss, pine, and mist. It wasn't marked on most modern maps, but one of them, Claire, had read about it online. She said it used to be a ranger trail before it was shut down. By the second afternoon, the weather changed. The clouds gathered low, heavy, and gray. The air turned cold enough that their breath showed in faint white ribbons. The group kept walking, their laughter fading into silence as the first drops began to fall. Then came the storm. It wasn't a soft rain. It fell in sheets, the sound swallowing their voices. The trees groaned under the weight of the wind. Somewhere in that noise, Claire fell behind. Her friends shouted for her, but the forest swallowed their words. They thought she had taken shelter, that she'd catch up when the rain stopped. By morning, she was gone. Search teams came with dogs, helicopters, and thermal scanners. They found the group's camp, half collapsed under wet leaves. They found the trail she should have taken, but no footprints after a certain point. For weeks, they searched. Nothing. No sign of her, not even a piece of clothing. Then, almost a month later, a hiker from another town turned in a camera he had found near a creek, a few miles off the main trail. It was wrapped in a torn piece of jacket, half buried in the mud. When they developed the film, most of the shots were ordinary: trees, wet ground, her friends smiling, a river blurred by rain. But the last few frames were different. The first showed a stretch of trail at dusk, empty except for the line of trees bending in the wind. The next was darker, tilted, as if taken in a hurry. And the last one, just a single still, showed Claire's face, half lit by her flashlight. Behind her, in the shadows of the trees, there was someone standing. The figure was tall, still, head slightly tilted toward the lens. No one recognized him. There was video, too. The final minutes of tape began with the sound of rain hitting leaves, her breathing quick and uneven. She was talking softly, saying she thought she heard something following them. Then the sound of twigs snapping. She turned the camera toward the path. There was no one there. Only her voice, low and shaking, whispering a name. The investigators listened to it over and over, trying to catch the word. When they slowed it down, the name became clear. It matched the record of a missing hiker from the same trail, last seen in 1972. His body was never found either. After that, the Forest Service sealed off the Ridgeway Pass entirely. Locals say they still hear voices there during storms, calling names through the rain. Some say the forest keeps them, the ones who go missing, the ones who follow the sound of footsteps that never seem too far behind. And somewhere deep in those woods, under layers of moss and silence, a camera lies buried, still holding its final image. In the summer of 1994, a boy named Adam lived with his parents in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Portland. It was the kind of place where every lawn looked the same, where the nights were still and the streetlights buzzed faintly in the dark. His room was on the second floor, his bed against the wall beneath a wide window that faced the backyard. He liked to fall asleep to the sound of the wind brushing through the branches of the old maple tree outside. The first time he heard the tapping, he thought it was just the tree. A soft, irregular sound, like fingers brushing against glass. It came just before midnight, faint but clear enough to wake him. He sat up, looked toward the window, saw nothing but the reflection of his own face. When he told his parents the next morning, they smiled. His father said it was just the branches hitting the pane. His mother laughed and said the wind plays tricks at night. For a while, Adam believed them. But the tapping kept coming. Some nights it was slow and spaced apart, almost gentle. Other nights, it came fast, like impatient knocking. Once, it came with a sound that made his chest tighten, a quiet, steady breathing on the other side of the glass. After a week of this, his father decided to put an end to it. He spent the afternoon outside with a saw, cutting down the old maple tree. The trunk came down with a groan, and the air smelled of sap and sawdust. Adam watched from the porch, thinking that maybe now he could sleep again. That night, the house was still. No wind, no branches. Just quiet. Until he heard it again. The tapping. Louder this time. He froze, staring at the window. Slowly, he turned his head toward the sound. The curtains moved slightly, the glass catching a faint reflection of the moonlight. And there, just beyond the thin layer of glass, was a face. It was pale, eyes wide and unblinking, lips pulled into a smile that didn't move. The smile was wrong. Too large, too still. Adam couldn't scream. He couldn't even breathe. Then, just as suddenly, the face leaned back and was gone. The tapping stopped. His father found him the next morning sitting in the corner of his room, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the window. When the police came, they found footprints outside beneath the window frame. Bare feet, pressed deep into the mud from the night's rain. They followed them across the yard until the prints just stopped, midway through the grass, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. Adam's parents never spoke of it again. They moved a year later, and the new house had smaller windows, ones without a view of the yard. The boy grew up, went to college, built a life on the other side of the country. For years, he told himself he had imagined it, that it was just a child's mind twisting shadows into monsters. But some things don't stay buried. On quiet nights, when the rain falls against his apartment window, he still hears it. A faint, patient tapping. Sometimes it comes once, sometimes twice. Always soft, always near. He tells himself it's nothing. Just the pipes. Just the storm. But deep down, he knows the truth. Sometimes, what we fear most isn't gone. It just follows quietly. On the northern coast of England, where the cliffs rose high above the grey sea, there once stood a lone phone booth. It had been there since the early 1960s, glass cracked, paint peeling, the metal rusted with salt and time. There were no houses nearby, no roads that led directly to it. The locals said it hadn't been connected to any phone line in years, but sometimes, late at night, it would ring. The sound carried across the cliffs, a thin, metallic tone that cut through the wind and waves. Fishermen said they heard it while walking home in the fog. A few of them answered at once, long ago. They all said the same thing after, never again. In the autumn of 1978, a young journalist named David came from London to investigate. He had heard the stories, dismissed them as superstition, but something in the way people avoided talking about it caught his attention. The bartender at the inn told him, "It rings when the weather changes. Always before a storm. But it doesn't call anyone. It remembers." He laughed at that. Still, the next evening, as the clouds began to roll in from the sea, David walked the mile down the narrow path to the edge of the cliff. The wind smelled of rain and salt. The booth stood there in the half-light, its glass streaked with grime. He noticed that the cord had been cut, the phone line snapped clean years ago. He set his tape recorder on the ground and waited. For a while, there was only the sea. Then, faintly, from inside the booth, the phone began to ring. He hesitated, staring at it. It rang again. And again. Finally, he stepped inside and lifted the receiver. The line was cold and silent. Then, beneath the static, he heard a voice. It was quiet, like someone standing very close. The voice whispered, "Don't look down." It was his own voice. He dropped the receiver, stumbled out of the booth, heart hammering. The phone continued to ring even as he backed away, echoing through the wind. He left his recorder where it was and ran back toward town. That night, a storm rolled in. Waves broke against the cliffs, and rain battered the coast until morning. When the villagers went out at dawn, the booth was gone, ripped from its bolts, shattered at the rocks below. David returned later that day to retrieve his tape recorder. It was covered in mud but still worked. He took it home, played it back, and listened. At first, he heard only wind and static. Then came the ringing. Then his own voice saying the same words he'd heard that night, "Don't look down." After that, there was breathing. Slow, deliberate, right beside the microphone. He never published the story. He moved inland, changed his line of work, tried to forget. But 20 years later, he returned to that coastal town for a different assignment. The cliffs were the same, though the sea had eaten more of the land. The path was overgrown, and the booth was long gone. Still, as the sky darkened and the wind picked up, he heard it again, faint and far away. The sound of a phone ringing somewhere down below. No one else seemed to hear it. Only him. It rang once. Then again. Then stopped. He stood there at the edge of the cliff, the sea whispering beneath, and realized something he had never wanted to believe. Some calls never stop ringing. They just wait for you to answer. In the fall of 2011, 3 urban explorers drove out to an abandoned farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania. The place had been empty for decades, a forgotten shell surrounded by fields gone wild. They'd found it online, one of those hidden places people whispered about but rarely visited. The story was that the last family who lived there had vanished sometime in the 1950s. The house stood alone at the end of a dirt road, its roof sagging, its windows long gone. Inside, everything smelled of dust and rain-soaked wood. Wallpaper peeled from the walls in long curls, and the floorboards creaked beneath every step. The explorers moved through the rooms quietly, taking photos, their flashlights cutting through layers of shadow. In what had once been a dining room, one of them, her name was Lily, noticed something strange. A section of the wall didn't match the rest. It looked newer, patched with different boards. When they tapped it, it sounded hollow. Curiosity won out. They pried the wood loose with a crowbar, and behind it was a narrow doorway sealed with plaster. It took them an hour to break through. Behind the wall was a room no one had seen in decades. Dust hung thick in the air, untouched. There was furniture inside, a small bed, a desk, a single chair, and a collection of framed photographs scattered across the floor. The pictures showed a family, parents, 2 children, all standing in front of the same house. But their faces had faded, blurred as if the light had erased them. On the desk sat a journal, its cover brittle with age. Lily opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat at first, dated entries from the late 1940s, written by a woman describing ordinary days, cooking, cleaning, the children playing in the yard. But as the pages went on, the tone changed. The writing grew frantic, the sentences shorter. One entry read, "It knocks every night now. Even when the children are asleep." The final page ended mid-sentence, the ink dragged downward as if the writer's hand had been pulled away. They left the room untouched after that, but Lily couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, back home, she dreamed she was in the same room, sitting at the desk, the journal open before her. In the dream, she was writing, but when she looked down, the words weren't hers, they were in the same old handwriting. She woke up sweating, her hands trembling. The dreams kept coming. Every night, she saw more of the room, more of the words she didn't remember writing. She began to recognize the woman from the faded photographs, same eyes, same hair. And then one night, she woke to find herself standing in her own basement, barefoot, fingers raw, her nails caked with plaster dust. On the far wall, there were words scratched into the paint, uneven, desperate letters carved by her own hands. She couldn't remember doing it. She only remembered the last dream, the sound of breathing behind her, and the same voice she had heard in the journal entries, whispering from the dark. She ran her fingers across the scratches on the wall, following the jagged letters until she read the message in full. It said, "The room was never sealed, it was waiting." Lily moved out of that house a week later. She never went back to the farmhouse, never spoke of it again. But sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, she swears she still smells that same old dust, still feels that same chill air behind her, and still dreams of a room with no door, waiting patiently in the dark. Each of these stories is real, at least as real as the people who told them, as real as the places still standing in the quiet corners of the world where rain falls just the same. They come from whispers, from notes left behind, from memories that never found their ending. Maybe you've heard pieces of them before, carried from voice to voice, softened by time. Or maybe they've only been waiting for someone to listen again. The rain outside has a way of blurring what's true and what's imagined. It washes over everything, leaving only the echoes. And somewhere in those echoes are the footsteps, the voices, the faces that refuse to fade. So sleep now. Let the rain take the weight of the night, let it hush the noise that lingers at the edge of thought. The world is still turning, the dark is still listening, and the stories will wait where they always have, in the quiet. Just remember, when the last drop hits the window and the air goes still, the silence that follows isn't empty. It remembers. The quiet has a memory.